So we're here today to talk about the unfortunate collision at times of our two worlds. We've not only had cases together, but we've certainly seen scenarios where a family is unfortunately not just dealing with the horror and trauma, usually, of a breakup, often a divorce, but cases where there is that unfortunate overlay of a criminal action. I have been on both sides of those equations. I have been the person who's trying to extract my client from that. I've been the person who represents the accused wrongdoer in those situations.
Yeah, it's not uncommon for Rebecca to call me, or I to call, have to give Rebecca a call to get involved in a family matter when, we're in need of that service.
Even late at night.
Yes.
That has happened.
One thing we have to be is responsive to our clients.
Yes,
so we have to be
often
responsive.
late at night,
Yeah, for sure.
unfortunately. I would say probably the most common is domestic violence. I would think often if there's been a domestic violence incident and one party is being arrested, often we see a lot of those. And we get a call either from the plaintiff or defendant in those cases to step in and help them through the domestic violence process that often dovetails with the divorce action. That's probably the most common, right?
Yeah, we see that quite often. So the Domestic Violence Act, which she knows more about than I could ever begin to know about, but it is, they have a list of 13 predicate acts in the state of New Jersey, which form the basis of a restraining order, for example. So I'm very familiar with those, having prosecuted and defended those crimes. And sometimes you see the temporary restraining order, but there's also a criminal component. So the individual is charged both criminally in the criminal court, and there's a restraining order in the family court.
And it's important to understand for a lot of people that they don't realize this about domestic violence. It does have that quasi-criminal aspect to it. And particularly when you have the additional criminal action going alongside it, I think it's really important to lean on the wisdom and experience of someone like yourself who has prosecuted and defended those actions, because these are real life moments. And domestic violence, for example, can affect child custody at the end of the day. They sometimes involve what we call pendente lite support obligations. They may be temporary, but these have real world ramifications on families.
So let me volunteer for this one. And let's assume, for the sake of argument, that it is a man being investigated or charged with a white-collar crime, right? So from my perspective, I hope the spouse stays with the client, right, for the emotional support throughout the investigation and charges and that process, if possible. One of the things we lean on is the fact of the spousal privilege. So, we don't want the spouse testifying against the husband. Now, should have that spousal privilege, and hopefully that's, we're not breaching that, but sometimes you'll see those issues from time to time.
And it's interesting because from my lens, obviously, I don't see them stay together, otherwise they wouldn't be calling me, but I have been involved in those cases where a spouse has said, I need to separate myself from this person, not just physically, but legally, for a variety of reasons, depending on the crime that's been charged. And I've been involved in these cases on both sides. I have represented the spouse who's leaving to protect himself or herself, and I've been on the flip side. And often in those cases, the reason that the spouse leaves isn't just monetary, it's ironically emotionally as well on their side. It's very hard often for the spouse to sit and stay and weather the storm. So they often need to leave, again, not just for monetary reasons, but for their own emotional and mental health well-being. I do often see that children often come into play. If the parties do have children, it's not uncommon for a spouse to leave the alleged wrongdoer just because they're looking to protect their children, perhaps keep them out of the public eye, perhaps shield them from things that are going on. It's a really unfortunate situation. Divorce is hard enough, breakups are hard enough, but when you have that, again, overlay of a criminal aspect, you need a real heightened sensitivity to it. There's a lot to grapple with.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think our two practice areas probably garner the most emotionally sensitive things. Yours so maybe more than mine, but outside of going through, a tough medical situation or whatnot, the emotion and the challenges of family law or going through a criminal investigation is tough on a client.
I would say that's true. Absolutely true.
So I think it helps to navigate. You have to navigate the emotional side together with the legal side. I think we have fortunately we're trained and we have the tools to do the legal side, but can you guide your client through these challenging times at the same time? So I think it's one of the things we do particularly well.
Yeah, I've absolutely seen assets be seized in these processes. I've seen, if not seized, outright liens placed on them. I think the approach has to be on multiple levels. I think number one, again, this is very traumatic for people. I often look and guide them to have a support system in place, whatever that may be. It may be great family, friends, it may be a therapist, somebody, some support network from an emotional and mental health perspective. I think hard conversations also have to be had, probably on both sides, about what their life is going to look like. If this person is convicted of something, they may not be able to continue their profession, whatever it may be. They may be incarcerated. From my client's perspective, they may be losing the presence of a spouse if that person is incarcerated. If there's children, they're going to be a single parent in every sense. If there are assets seized or liens placed upon them, financially, their life is going to change. So I think it requires, again, a strong support network and very real conversations and education about what could happen.
Right. And on the criminal side, I think you have to be very frank with your clients. If they're under investigation for something, do not compound your problems. At the end of the day, there could be restitution to pay, forfeiture, and potentially fines. Do not try to unlawfully dissipate your assets by fraudulently transferring them to a spouse, to another entity, to another partner or whatnot. Don't compound your problems. So that's one of the things
I would agree with that. I would also say not just transferring them elsewhere or even to the spouse, but don't try to hold on to things to negatively affect your spouse. Because unfortunately, I have seen that, and you have to look at it at the end of the day, okay? What good is that doing you? If you have children, what good is that doing them? I think if there is that unfortunate mashup of family and criminal case, I think sensitivity needs to be given to how to best quickly resolve whatever portion you can. To your point, don't compound your problem. If you can resolve the family law issue, resolve it, because if you can resolve it up front, that's the best it's ever going to get. Time is not your friend here.
One of the things, at least for the defendant or potential defendant who's being investigated, and you have to let him know not to speak, right? I'm now your voice to the outside world. The only person that you can have a confidential communication with is me as your lawyer or your spouse, right? But this may cause division between the client and the spouse. So you want to be careful there too. So what you say can be used against you if you're a target of a criminal investigation or you're under charges. So your initial reaction, I think, for anybody who's being investigated or charged with a crime is to speak about it, right? Now, because it's a problem. We speak about our problems in life. So you have to exercise extreme restraint and tell the client to exercise extreme restraint about speaking about it to anyone other than the legal team. And likewise for the family, I imagine, and Rebecca would know most, how to surround, that individual to not make it any worse for them. Because oftentimes, and let's say it's the man who's being charged or investigated and is the breadwinner perhaps, or co-equal in terms of earning. I mean, they may be suffering a significant hit to the family financially, so you don't want to, you got to think of those things.
I think from a family perspective, I do, if possible, like a level of coordination between both sides. So it may be that my client, even if they are not the alleged wrongdoer, maybe they need to consult with criminal counsel to see if they have any exposure or to educate themselves independently about the process so they can understand what the other spouse is going through. I often recommend that. If I represent the potential defendant or defendant in the criminal action, who for me, my purposes would be a party in the divorce action, I often want to coordinate with criminal counsel so that I know what's going on in their case and that I can use that to shape the decisions on the family law side. I think you cannot have these actions in parallel in a vacuum. I think there has to be some level of transparency if possible. What's going on should be known to everybody.
Yeah, I think so too. I think you got to look for the red flags, right? If your standard of living is $100,000 a year for which you're supporting your family, and then all of a sudden it goes to $1 million a year, right? And there's trips, vacations, and expensive cars and the like. Are they filing joint tax returns? What could implicate? So you have to be careful on both sides of the equation.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of times in those scenarios, when you have someone who maybe was not the defendant or potential defendant in a criminal action, but they benefited from that, they filed those joint tax returns, you may need to have very real conversations with that client that even though they did not do something criminal, they may have some exposure, whatever it may be. It may be with the federal tax authority, state tax authorities. It might be something else. So again, you need a level of transparency.
So are you saying multiple Chanel bags when you never had one before may be a bad idea?
I mean, I don't think Chanel bags are ever a bad idea, to be clear, but I will have the caveat is if your tax returns say that you maybe make $35,000 a year every year for the past 20 years, and you have a yacht and about 10 Chanel bags, there are questions that are going to be raised.
Right.
Sooner the better, out of the gate.
Yes, for certainly.
Sooner the better.
Yeah, and from my perspective, experience, someone who's been down this road before, I think, if I have somewhat of an advantage in doing the work that I've done for the course of 30 years, it's been being in the trenches of these cases on both sides of the equation, both as a prosecutor, state and federally, and now on the defense side. And for me, and one of the reasons why I chose Mandelbaum is its full service aspect. I can walk down the hall or downstairs and have competent counsel to be able to provide our clients with those resources. Yeah. And Rebecca's is my first call.
Well, yep, I've called you at 9 p.m. on a Friday night and he picked up. So I would say the same. And I think, again, sooner the better. Absolutely. But to your point, they have to have experience. When you're in my world, again, divorce is hard enough, breakups are hard enough. But when there's a criminal overlay, if you have never had experience as a lawyer with that aspect, that additional hardship and monkey wrench in a divorce case, certainly, I think that is a disadvantage. So I would urge people in those situations to find someone who's guided people through that scenario, because there are considerations that somebody should have, that practitioners ought to have, that you may not think of in the normal, what are called normal or routine, ordinary divorce case without that. And again, I'm fortunate enough that I have competent counsel that I can rely on when I have criminal questions.